Well, thank you for coming. My name is Bart Fraser. I am Program Director at the Future of Freedom Foundation, who co-sponsors this event with the GMU Econ Society. And thank you for coming to this Economic Liberty Lecture Series. I want to also thank you for being our guinea pigs. This is the first event that we've ever had that had a live Skype feed in, so hopefully it goes off without a hitch. And we're pleased to have Walter willing to do this for us, and it should be a good lecture. The Future of Freedom Foundation is a nonprofit libertarian educational foundation founded in 1989 to promote an uncompromising vision of the free society, economic liberty, individual freedom. We do that through a variety of methods. With the printed word, we have a print journal, Future of Freedom, that we've been publishing since 1990. There are free sample copies up in the lobby that you can get. Also, our website, of course, fff.org, which is a massive treasure trove of libertarian articles and videos. We have over 4,000 original articles, as well over 100 videos from lectures and conferences like this. We also have a internet email newsletter that we send out on a daily basis, every day but Sunday, that has all of our current original articles, our upcoming events, cold articles from the internet, wonderful libertarian articles that we cull from publications all across the internet that's free for the asking. If you just send an email to fff@fff.org with subscribe in the subject line, we'll sign you right up for that, and you can also sign up for that in the lobby as well. And of course, we have this venue here, the Economic Liberty Lecture Series, which we've been putting on for quite some time. This is well over 30 lectures now that we have put on. This is the first time that we've had Walter here, which we're very pleased to have, and also pleased to be presenting to you through the internet. And to introduce Walter, I provide David Roth here from the GMU Econ Society.
Good evening, everyone. I'm David Roth, the president of the Economic Society at Mason. The Econ Society is a student organization dedicated to the personal, professional, and academic development of all students interested in the study of economics. We accomplish that by hosting lecture events like this one tonight. If you would like to know more about the Econ Society, please speak to me after the event or visit our website, economics-society.org. It is my pleasure tonight to introduce Dr. Walter Block. Walter Block earned his Ph.D. in economics at Columbia University. He is an author and editor and co-editor of many books which include Defending the Undefendable, Lexicon of Economic Thought, and Rent Control, Myths and Realities. Dr. Block has written more than 500 articles for various journals, magazines, and newspapers, such as the Review of Austrian Economics, the Journal of Libertarian Studies, and the Journal of Labor Economics. He is currently a professor and chair of economics at the College of Business Administration at Loyola University. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Walter Block.
Okay, the title that I've been given, or that I concocted, or somebody concocted, I'm not sure how we got this, but let me read it. The Inextricable Link Between Economic Freedom and Individual Liberty. Government Reduces Liberty Through Economic Assault. Again, I'm not sure who came up with this, but I've heard worse titles or worse topics to address, so I'll do what I can with this. So let me read it again. The Inextricable Link Between Economic Freedom and Individual Liberty. Government Reduces Liberty Through Economic Assault. So first I said, well, what is individual liberty? And my answer to that is people can do whatever they damn well please, whatever they want, as long as their actions are compatible with the non-aggression principle and private property rights based on homesteading. How do we work on that? How did I get that? Well, I got a lot of that from Murray Rothbard, from whom I get a lot of libertarian stuff. And the non-aggression principle just means keep your mitts to yourself. Don't grab other people or their property without their permission. You can do it in the boxing ring because your opponent in the boxing ring is giving you permission to hit him above the belt, not to bite his ear, not to hit him below the belt, but hit him above the belt. You can even engage in sadomasochistic whippings because the sadist and the masochist have equally agreed to do their thing. Here's my sadomasochistic joke. Don't ask me why I have to tell this joke, but I must. I feel compelled. The masochist says to the sadist, "Beat me." And you know what the sadist says? "No." Ha ha ha. Get the joke? Well, I don't know if you people get it or not. I think it's very funny. In any case, the non-aggression principle has to be tied with private property rights because suppose A grabs B's bicycle. Is A the aggressor, or rather, I should say, suppose A grabs the bicycle that B is sitting on. Let me not say it's B's bicycle. The question is it B's bicycle? Because just because he's sitting on it doesn't mean that it is properly his. It could be yesterday that B stole A's bicycle and A is just repossessing the bicycle from B. So you have to have some sort of theory of property rights other than, we each own ourselves, which I think is sort of a basic, obvious point. We've homesteaded ourselves. So we have to have a theory of private property rights, and the libertarian theory, as far as I understand it, is based on homesteading. He who mixes his land with his labor with the land gets to own the land. He who domesticates a wild cow and now milks the cow gets to own the milk. And then, as Robert Nozick talks about, a legitimate title transfer, so they can trade or have barter or something. And now the guy who produced the milk doesn't own the milk, but he owns the corn, say, that was grown on the land. And the guy who grew the corn no longer owns the corn because he traded it to the other guy for the milk. And that's pretty much what I would call thin libertarianism. I will be attacking thick libertarianism, and Sheldon Richman has been writing about how great thick libertarianism is, and I think it's all wrong. And I, in the course of this lecture, hope to make the case for thin libertarianism, and that's what thin libertarianism is. It's just that non-aggression principle, private property rights based on homesteading, and then any voluntary economic activity, such as barter, trade, buying, selling, renting, employment, whatever. Whereas thick libertarianism sometimes jettisons part of this, but certainly adds to it by saying you shouldn't be a racist, you shouldn't be a sexist, you shouldn't be, you should be a feminist, and all sorts of adventitious things are added to it. Okay, so that's my first point. What is individual liberty? Do whatever you want. Liberty is distinguished from license. They say liberty is distinguished from license. It doesn't mean liberty means you can do anything you want, but you can't violate the non-aggression principle. So, for example, murder, rape, theft, kidnapping, slavery would all be ruled out of court because they are per se violations of the non-aggression principle. And indeed, whenever you ask anything, any question about anything, the way the libertarian answers it with the libertarian eyeglasses, you look at any question through the libertarian eyeglasses and you say, is it a per se violation of the non-aggression principle? In which case, it would be outlawed by libertarianism, and if not, not. And I think this is a splendid tool to look upon all sorts of complicated issues. And maybe some of those complicated issues, I don't know, abortion or what do you call it? Abortion might be a complicated issue, and you look at it through these libertarian eyeglasses, and I think you'll come out okay. And if you don't, then you won't. So my liberty stops at your chin, and my liberty stops at your bicycle. Okay, so the second point that I would make based on this title that I'm working with is, so I've discussed what is individual liberty. So now the second one is, what is economic freedom or economic liberty? And I would say that economic freedom or economic liberty is a subset of general liberty. General liberty is you can do anything you want. Economic liberty is you can do anything you want within the economic realm. And there are two other realms of political philosophy. One is foreign policy, and the other is personal liberties. And the third one is economic liberty. So what economic freedom is capitalist acts between consenting adults, a subset of general freedom. And I got capitalist acts between consenting adults, also from Robert Nozick, who is a great wordsmith. And the idea here is, the lefties are always saying, well, we have to have anything between consenting adults, and they favor, or at least the good ones, favor legalizing sex crimes like prostitution or pornography, or legalizing drugs. And that's all well and good. And we libertarians certainly go along with our friends on the left on those issues. But we say not only should you be free to engage in pornography and prostitution and drugs and gambling and other things like that, smoking cigarettes or drinking booze or whatever, but you also should have economic liberty. You should have the right to buy and sell at any price you want, and therefore there shouldn't be any price controls, and the government shouldn't preclude certain things like, say, a market in used body parts. We should be able to buy and sell rights to used kidneys or lungs or livers or hearts or whatever it is. So economic freedom would be a subset of general overall freedom, and I think economic freedom is very efficacious, very efficient. One of my research interests is comparing the economic freedom of various countries, and what we find, which shouldn't amaze anyone in this audience, is that those countries that are the most economically free are also the most prosperous and also growing the fastest, and those that have the least economic freedom are the ones that are economic basket cases, or the ones that are enmeshed in poverty. Okay, so what is the link between them? I think I've answered that. One is a subset of the other. Economic freedom is a subset of overall freedom and overall liberty. And I think, as I say, there are three aspects of libertarianism. And in order to really be a libertarian, you have to, I think, favor freedom in all three realms. And if you just favor economic freedom in two of the realms or one of the realms, well, then you're not really a libertarian. Maybe you're a quasi-libertarian or a semi-demi-libertarian, but not really a good kosher libertarian. And the three areas are personal freedoms like sex, drugs, and rock and roll. Economic freedom would be, getting rid of minimum wage and tariffs and control and taxes and things like that. And foreign policy, I think, is also important. That if you believe in economic freedom and personal freedom, but you also think that the U.S. should be running the world, and that it's justified to have, 1,000 military bases in 150 different countries, well, then you're not really a libertarian. Whereas Thomas Sowell and Walter Williams are really great on economic and personal liberties, but they're a little bit of a warmonger for my taste, so I wouldn't really count them as libertarians. Okay, the fourth point I want to make after what is individual liberty and what is economic freedom and what is the link, the fourth one is, well, what is government? And it seems to me that government is initiatory force. It taxes people, and it has a monopoly of legal power within a geographical area. And therefore, it's per se a violation of the non-aggression principle, which means that only anarchist libertarians are pure libertarians. Now, there are three types of libertarians: the anarcho-capitalist libertarian, and the most famous name there would be Murray Rothbard. Then there are limited government libertarians, or minarchists, minimal government statists. These people are pretty good. It's just that they allow government, legitimacy of government, and people I would categorized in that way would be Ayn Rand, Robert Nozick, Ron Paul, and Ludwig von Mises, all heroes of ours, but still they're not anarcho-capitalists, they're moderates. I would say of all people calling themselves libertarians, anarchists are maybe 5%. The minarchists are maybe, 50%, and the third group, classical liberals, who I would say Hayek and Friedman would be the most famous there. Not David Friedman, Milton Friedman. David Friedman is an anarchist. And here they allow a whole bunch of other functions for government. The minarchists, like Ayn Rand, would say government has only one role to play, and that's to protect the person and property of people, which sounds pretty libertarian. And to that end, the government has three legitimate functions, or three legitimate institutions. One is armies, to keep foreign bad guys off of us, not to go exporting democracy everywhere. And they don't even export democracy. I mean, when Egypt had a democratic election and these al-Sisi took over, the U.S. doesn't even call it a coup. So they're really not in favor of democracy. They're just in favor of world domination. Notice how you say they for the U.S. government. The second one is police. Let's keep local bad guys off of us. And there, the idea is not to keep us away from drugs, or rather keep cops from donuts. It's that the great aphorism, a new bumper sticker. We lost. We fought the war on drugs, and drugs won. Well, I hope drugs win, at least for consenting adults, and hopefully the pattern of what is it, Uruguay and Portugal and Colorado and Washington, or at least starting legalizing drugs. And the third one that Ayn Rand and the limited government people would say is legitimate would be courts to determine who the good guys are and who the bad guys are. And then the other group, I would call them classical liberals, the Hayeks, the Friedmans, who are very, very good on very many issues, but they add things like the Fed or negative income tax or I don't know, school vouchers and other things that are really not compatible with libertarianism. Now, the objection to what I just said is, well, government really is not coercive. Government is really voluntary. It's sort of like club dues. Look, if you join the chess club or you join the, the golf club or the tennis club, you have to pay your dues. And if you don't pay your dues, you can't be in the club. And there are people who say, well, the government is just a club, the U.S. club. We're a club, and taxes are the dues. Now, maybe they're a little high, but, you're free to leave. If you don't want to pay the club dues here, you go somewhere else. The problem with that is that this is sort of arguing in a circle. It sort of assumes that the government has a right to impose taxes on us, but we've never agreed to be part of this club. I didn't sign any contract saying I would be part of the U.S. Club. Schumpeter put it very well. I'm going to read a quote from him. He said, "The theory which construes taxes on the analogy of club dues proves how far removed this part of social science is from scientific habits of mind." Unquote. I think that Schumpeter is absolutely correct. People are not very scientific in the sense of rational who think that taxes are voluntary. I mean, taxes aren't voluntary, and we didn't agree to them. If we agreed to them, fine, but where's the contract that said that? Did any of you, or I didn't sign any contract saying I'm part of the U.S. club? So it's just an imposition, and it's certainly incompatible with the strict, limited, narrow vision of libertarianism, namely anarcho-capitalism. Okay, so what are some areas where the government impinges on our economic liberty? Examples come up: rent control, minimum wage, taxes, tariffs, quotas. We have, I don't know, tens of thousands of pages of regulations about, what happens if you find some chipmunk that seems to be endangered, and, what you're supposed to do is it shoot? No, shoot, shovel, shoot, and shut up. If you find some sort of chipmunk or tortoise or something, because if you tell the authorities, they take your property away, which is sort of a violation of rights. The next point I want to make is that the more government, the less freedom. We've done some empirical research on that and found that those countries like Hong Kong and Singapore, which are usually the freest countries of all, and I think New Zealand and Switzerland are up there. The U.S. used to be up there. When I first started doing this research, the U.S. was like 4 or 5 in terms of economic liberty. And now the U.S. is 15 or 16, I forget exactly where they are. So the U.S. has been falling down in liberty, and the empirical finding is that economic liberty is beneficial. It's pragmatic. It brings about a greater wealth and fights poverty. And also, there's a deontological point, or rather, maybe not a deontological point, an Austrian point, and that is that all the free market consists of is voluntary trade. Buying, selling, renting, investing, whatever it is, it's all voluntary trade. And if it's not voluntary trade or voluntary commercial interactions, it's not part of the market. And every voluntary trade necessarily makes people better off, at least in the ex ante sense. So, for example, if I trade you this wristwatch for your pen, and I'm holding up my pen here, let me see if there it is. Maybe it's a 12-foot pen. You give me this pen, and I give you this wristwatch. It must mean Where's that wristwatch? There it is. It must mean that I value the pen I'm getting more than the wristwatch I'm giving, and you value the wristwatch you're getting more than the pen you're giving. Otherwise, why would we agree to the deal? Now, it might be that you're my student and you think that if you make this trade, you'll get an A, which isn't true, and you're not my student anyway. So we don't know the reasons why you are willing to make this trade. But the point is that if you're willing to make this trade, it shows that at least in the ex ante sense of anticipation, you expect to benefit, otherwise you wouldn't do it. And since the free market consists of only the concatenation of all these voluntary trades, the free market necessarily makes people wealthy. And any interference makes people less wealthy than they could be. Now, ex post, maybe you'll regret your trade, but that's usually rare. So not only do we have empirical evidence or empirical, how shall I call it, illustrations better than evidence that the market brings about greater wealth, we also have a principled or a theoretical reason to believe that this is true and that it's necessarily true. Okay, now let me get to my man Sheldon Richman and thick and thin libertarianism. Remember, thin libertarianism is the non-aggression principle plus property rights based on homesteading, and that's it. Whereas thick libertarianism sometimes quarrels with that, but even if they accept that, and I'm sure Sheldon accepts that, they add to it, you can't be a bigot, you can't be a racist, you can't be a sexist, you can't be, I don't know, a homophobe or a hater of homosexuals. You have to be sort of a nice guy. And one of my problems with that is, well, look, cancer research is good also. In order to be a libertarian, do you have to favor cancer research? Do you have to contribute to cancer research? No. I mean, that's just a lunatic to think that libertarianism required that you be a general nice guy all around. You can be a hater. You can hate Jews or blacks or, I don't know, green people or bald people or people with follicles or whatever. Just keep your mitts off of them. What your thoughts are is irrelevant to libertarianism. You can be a racist as long as you don't touch harm any little bit of skin or hair of a black person. You can be an anti-Semite as long as you don't physically harm or invade any Jew. Whereas the thick libertarians like Sheldon Richman would disagree with. And they have a very powerful argument. Their very powerful argument is another way of putting libertarianism. You see, what I did is I put it in terms of non-aggression principle and private property rights. There are other ways of putting it, some valid and some invalid, and I think Sheldon puts it in an invalid way. Another valid way of putting it is free association. Another way of putting libertarianism is that it supports free association and it abhors or rejects non-free association. For example, free association just means that we should only associate with people that we want to. And if we don't want to associate with people, like if we don't say we don't want to have blacks or Jews or, I don't know, old people or young people in our store, we just put a little sign saying, no blacks, Jews, old people, young people, whatever, in our store. And we have a right to do that. And the 1946 Civil Rights Act, so-called, said that Woolworths had to serve black people whether they wanted to or not. And that's a violation of free association. So any libertarian who supports that part of the 1964 Civil Rights Act is, I think, acting incompatibly with libertarianism. So that's a valid way of putting libertarianism alternatively to the non-aggression principle. I think it's equivalent, logically equivalent to it. But now is an illegitimate way of putting libertarianism, and that is not only Sheldon, but everybody does that. Baruch does it. Everybody does it. I don't know of anyone who doesn't do it except me. And I just thought of it recently. Published it. I forget when I published. The point is, the other way of putting it is that we libertarians favor individualism and oppose collectivism. And I think that's wrong. And I don't care how many libertarians have said it, and I don't care how prestigious they are, up to and including my man Murray Rothbard, who is Mr. Libertarian. He's just dead wrong on this. Libertarian has got nothing to do with individualism, supporting individualism. It's got nothing to do with attacking collectivism. Why do I say that? Because, look, if you really favored before I get into this, I want to distinguish between methodological individualism and political individualism. I'm not talking about methodological individualism which is a part and parcel of Austrian economics, namely only individuals act. There is no such thing as a group apart from the individuals who comprise it. If the group does something, it's because the individuals did it. And if you take all the individuals away from the group, there's no more group. So group is just or a nation or a team or whatever it is. It's just a shorthand form for a bunch of individuals. So I'm a methodological individualist. I accept that there is no group apart from the individuals, but I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about something very different, namely political individualism versus collectivism. And the way I see it, by the way, that echo is still there. So if you can work harder at getting the echo, although I'm getting used to it, maybe if you get rid of it, I'll lose my train of thought. Who knows? Look, if you're really in favor of individualism, you have to favor individual sports and you have to be against team or collectivist sports. For example, individual track or individual swimming, singles in tennis or singles in handball are all individualist sports, and we individualists can support them. However, we have to oppose baseball and football and basketball and doubles in tennis and doubles in handball. That's crazy. That's just lunatic. That's, I don't know, crazy. Libertarianism doesn't have to favor individual sports and oppose group sports or team sports. Libertarianism doesn't have to favor individual action. How about co-authorship? I co-author articles with people. Namely, it's a collective. Ayn Rand is always talking about the senior collective, and it's a joke, haha, we're the senior collective and we're against collectivism. Now, I understand collectivism is communism too, but I distinguish between voluntary collectivism, such as the nunnery, the convent, the kibbutz, the commune, the collective, syndicalist, cooperatives, monastery, abbey, priory, friary, religious community, the family. Even the family is a collective. The family adopts the Marxian notion of from each according to his ability to each according to his need. A little girl of 3 years old doesn't eat in accordance with her ability to produce income. So the question is not whether it's collectivism or individualism, but rather whether it's voluntary or coercive. So you can have voluntary collectivism, and I just mentioned nunnery, convent, kibbutz are all voluntary collectives, and then you can have coercive collectives, which are communism, North Korea, USSR, Cuba. On the other hand, you can have a voluntary individualism, which is good, laissez-faire capitalism, but you can also have coercive individualism, where you're against collectives, you're against communes, and that would be fascism. And we libertarians are equally opposed to both. So now here's where Sheldon's point comes in, and I think it's just totally wrong, but it's sort of brilliant in a negative way. And what Sheldon says is, look, racism is collectivism. And he reads some quote from Ayn Rand saying that racism is the worst form of collectivism, yak, yak, yak. And collectivism is incompatible with libertarianism, ergo, racism is incompatible with libertarianism. It's true if you accept all the premises, but I reject the premise that collectivism is incompatible with libertarianism. I think collectivism is compatible with libertarianism as long as it's voluntary. And if you want to be a racist bigot, you can be a libertarian in good standing, as far as I'm concerned, as long as you don't hurt, physically harm black people or lynchings or slavery or anything like that. You can hate them all you want. Just keep your goddamn mitts off of them, and you can be as good a libertarian as a libertarian who loves black people or homosexuals or feminists or whatever it is. Well, I'm going on for about a half hour, and I'm sort of running out of steam. And I enjoy interaction with people a lot more than just babbling by myself. So I think I'll call a halt to my formal remarks, and hopefully there'll be some questions. I hope I was provocative enough to create some questions or a controversy. And in discussing these things, we can, I think, get a deeper, better understanding of libertarianism, which is one of my goals. So thanks for your attention. And now let the questions or comments or criticisms come rolling forth.
Okay, I'm going to try another microphone. Okay. First of all, you only broke up completely one time during your transmission, and that was when you were giving your own definition of libertarianism. Would you mind giving that again?
Well, my own definition of libertarianism is the non-aggression principle, and coupled with private property rights and based on homesteading. That's the usual one. Another one that I accept is the law of free association. That is, in my view, what thin libertarianism is all about. And I think thin libertarianism is the only proper libertarianism. And I think thick libertarianism is an attempt to hijack proper or thin libertarianism, where you add adventitious things. I know I play chess, and I could say, well, in order to be a libertarian, you have to love chess. Well, that's crazy. You don't have to love chess. You can be indifferent to chess. You can hate chess. Just don't go beat up Bobby Fischer or any other chess player.
Hey, my name is Steve Hankin. I'm a retired tax attorney who takes classes at this university. I was kind of interested in some of your remarks about collectivism, and I wasn't quite sure I understood it because I've always thought that collectivism versus individualism is essentially the continuum that libertarians operate in, and that when people say collectivism, that I assume that they mean political collectivism, meaning that you will be forced, that there is coercion, that collectivism by definition means coercion. I think that most people use the term collectivism to mean political collectivism, meaning that there will be coercive force. So I didn't quite understand why you seem to reject that continuum. And I have a related comment in there that would tie in this. I kind of thought your debate with Sheldon, I kind of agreed with you, but not for the reasons I thought that you were saying, and that is that I think the continuum for libertarians should not be left to right, and that Sheldon is kind of mixing up this left to right continuum with the continuum that I think is the libertarian continuum, which is individual politically or collective politically. In light of what I've said, could you kind of clarify? Do you agree with what I've said, or could you clarify?
Well, no, I don't agree. I think that you're right. A lot of people think when they think of collectivism, they think of force and coercion, but that need not be the case. For example, I gave cases of collectivism that are totally voluntary. The nunnery, the convent, the kibbutz, the commune, the collective, syndicalists, cooperatives, monastery, abbey, friary, religious community, co-authorships, all of those things are collective-ish, but none of them have any force. And how about racism? Ayn Rand says that racism is the worst form of collectivism. Ron Paul says the same thing. Sheldon cites one or the other of both and says, well, look, since racism is collectivism, and since collectivism is incompatible with libertarianism, racism is incompatible with libertarianism. Racism is not incompatible with libertarianism. You can be a bloody bigot, racist, prejudiced, all you want, as long as you keep your mitts to yourself and do not violate the rights of any black person. You can be as racist as you want and be a libertarian. Now, that's the provocative point. It doesn't sound right. And when the New York Times gets hold of this, they're going to say, well, all libertarians are racist, which is crazy. You might as well say all libertarians either love or hate chess. Racism and chess and cancer research are irrelevant to libertarianism. Libertarianism, in its proper thin area, is limited to the non-aggression principle and free association and private property rights. It's got nothing to do with collectivism or racism or sexism or homosexualism or whatever, homophobism or whatever that word is. With regard to your second point, I agree with you. Libertarianism is neither of the left nor the right. One of my articles somewhere is an attack on a whole bunch of people, Ron Paul and Roderick Long and Hans Hoppe and I forget who else, where I say libertarianism is neither of the left nor the right, a critique of these three left libertarians and these three right libertarians. Hans and Ron Paul were right libertarians, and I think Roderick Long was one of my left libertarians. I forget, I had two or three other people there too. In my view, libertarianism is neither of the left nor of the right. We're sui generis, we're unique. The left is a little bit better on personal liberties. The right is a little bit better on economic liberties. They're both god awful on foreign policy, and we have nothing to do with either of them. The political philosophical sphere is a three-legged stool, and one leg is left and one leg is right, and the third leg is libertarianism, and we are different than all of them. There are left-wing and right-wing thick libertarians. For example, most, like Sheldon, most thick libertarians are lefties, and they say, well, you have to be a feminist and you have to be pro-union, God help us. But there are righties too, and Hans Hoppe, I've had a little debate with him. He denies it. I think it's true that he's a little bit of a right-wing thick libertarian in the sense that he thinks that homosexuals and I don't know, whim worshippers and green types and earth worshippers are somehow lesser than ordinary people. So I reject left and right. I think Stalin was a leftist and Hitler was a rightist. And yet, from a libertarian point of view, there's not a dime's worth of difference between them. They're both horrible people. So I hope I've done justice to your questions.
If I could follow up on obviously we're totally in accord with each other on the second issue. But the first issue, I just want to make a slight comment. I view Ayn Rand, as being her when she talks of collectivism and individualism, it's a personal philosophy. It's a total philosophy. It isn't limited to a political philosophy. But I think when most people use the term collectivism, they are talking about a political philosophy. And so when you make these examples of, well, anybody could have a club or a religion, all of those are not political, they're voluntary. And I don't think that's how most people use the term collectivism. They use it to mean a political philosophy. And you seem to have this idea, no, it isn't limited to that way. And I'm saying it's implied. I think most people use it that way, except Ayn Rand, who obviously used it in a much broader sense.
Well, it's not just Ayn Rand. It's Ron Paul. It's Murray Rothbard. A lot of people attack collectivism. And Ron Paul, who is a good libertarian, one of the most successful libertarians, and I revere Ron Paul, but I don't agree with him on everything. Ron Paul thinks that racism is collectivism. Well, if you say that collectivism is forced, then you're saying if racism is collectivism, then racism is forced. Racism is not forced. Racism is a view that blacks are inferior or that I don't want to have anything to do with blacks or something like that. That's what racism is. Racism doesn't mean you have to lynch blacks or hurt them or physically invade them. So if you believe that racism is collectivism and but it's not forced, then you're saying racism is incompatible with libertarianism. And I say racism and sexism and all these other isms are compatible with libertarianism. And I think that this might be a minority position, I'm not sure, but the truth is never determined by an election. And I think that I've got the correct analysis here.
Hi, Walter. This is Jacob Hornberger. Hey, got a question for you. As you know, there's a split in the libertarian movement on the issue of immigration. Some people support immigration controls, and I consider the real libertarians are the ones that favor open immigration. Would you tell us your views on immigration and how they fit in with your understanding of the libertarian paradigm?
Yeah, sure. I'm a free immigration person. I put my libertarian spectacles on and I ask myself, suppose somebody comes from, I don't know, Mexico or China or Mars for that matter, and he lands in the middle of, I don't know, Nevada. Let's pick Nevada because Nevada is, 80% owned by the government? And he lands by a helicopter or a parachute. Don't ask how he lands. He lands in a government-owned acreage, and he starts growing corn there. Did he per se violate any rights? Well, I don't think so. He didn't violate any rights because the government didn't homestead that land. He's the first homesteader. And to say that he shouldn't be allowed in is to say that, from a libertarian point of view, that he violated the non-aggression principle. But how did he violate the non-aggression principle? Now, there are those who say, well, if we have open immigration, millions of Chinese or millions of Martians or whoever they are, they're going to come in. Well, if you don't like that, then what you should do is privatize not every square mile, not every acre, not every square yard, but every inch of the country. And I'm including parks, I'm including rivers, lakes. My latest book is on how we should privatize rivers, lakes, and oceans. Privatize everything, every square inch, every public park, every road, everything. And now if somebody catapults in with a, what do you call it, a helicopter, now he's invading. But right now, we have vast tracts of land that are not privately owned. And if a Martian or a Chinese person or a Mexican or whatever the immigrant is came in and started homesteading that stuff, including public parks, which I think shouldn't be, but to make it more easy, less complicated, let's just suppose he goes to Alaska or Nevada or Montana, and he goes not on a private property, but on public property. Where did he make any invasion, or even on private property, if with invitation of the owner of the property? Bumper, you have a square mile somewhere, let's say you're Farmer Bumper, and you invite 10,000 Chinese to come there. Whose rights did you violate? Nobody's. So I think that, I revere Murray Rothbard and Hans Hoppe. I think Murray was Mr. Libertarian, and Hans has done such great theoretical work on libertarianism. I think he maybe deserves the notation of Mr. Libertarian, but on this issue, they're wrong. Rather, there's Rothbard 1 and Rothbard 2. The initial Murray Rothbard was a free, open immigration person, but then somehow he got sucked into this paleo-conservative idea that immigration is no good, and Rothbard 2 came out against it. Hans was always against it. Open immigration. I am fully in accord with open immigration. I've got maybe 5 articles, one co-authored with Anthony Gregory, I think another one co-authored in a collectivist way with somebody else, I forget who, and several on my own. So I've got a long paper trail on open immigration. I think open immigration is the only theory compatible with libertarianism.
Thank you. Why do you, with libertarianism, why do you completely not allow any foreign or the U.S. getting involved in any foreign wars? Isn't it, why can't we defend our right for free markets in the wider world?
I got every other word of that, and if I misconstrue your question, please forgive me, but I'll answer it best I can. What you're asking, if I understand you, is what about foreign wars? Can't we have defense against foreign aggressors? Can't we have protection against foreign enemies? And my answer is yes. Sure, we should have. Let's suppose we're not anarchists. We're just minimal government people, or even we're classical liberals, and we have a government and we have an army. The army should be the Coast Guard. The army should not be in. I think it's 150 different countries. Now, what the hell are we doing in Japan? What are we doing in Germany? What are we doing in Africa? What are we doing in South America? We're not protecting the U.S. The Army should be very, very strong and powerful. By the way, right now, the U.S. Army military spends, I think, more than the next military budgets of the next 14 different countries put together. That's not defense. Look, right now, the NBA, the National Basketball Association, is having their playoffs. And when they have a playoff, and when the other team has got the ball, then our team, the audience on our side yells, defense, defense. And when we've got the ball, they don't yell defense. They don't yell anything. They don't want to interrupt them. But if they yelled anything, they would say offense, offense. Namely, basketball players are sophisticated enough to be able to distinguish between offense and defense, whereas a lot of our friends on the right, the neocons, the warmongering people, are saying, that the only defense is a strong offense, but that's crazy. A strong offense is not a defense. A defense means that anyone who dares attack us, and I don't call 9/11 an attack. That was not an initiatory attack. That was, Ron Paul made the very, very good point against Mayor Giuliani that was blowback. They were there because we were over there. First, we were in the Middle East, we were in Europe, we were in Afghanistan, we were in Iraq, we were everywhere. And look, suppose it was the opposite. Suppose some Brazilian troops were marching around the U.S. And now we didn't like the Brazilian troops, and we knocked off some building in Sao Paulo in Brazil. That would be blowback. And Ron Paul made a very, very strong, eloquent statement against Giuliani. That was one of the high points of his election. That we want defense, we don't want offense, and we've got offense. So I hope that's responsive to your question.
Walter, I'm going to rephrase his question for him. He was asking you, why shouldn't the U.S. military get involved with helping keep free markets open? And his examples were Somalia interfering with international waters and with Russia getting involved with the Ukraine and upsetting markets in Europe.
Sorry, I missed the question. With regard to, one of my recent articles, what I said is, suppose Putin were to send out a message saying that he's putting Soviet troops in Mexico and Canada because he doesn't like the way the federal government is treating this rancher in Nevada, Clive and Bundy. Suppose he put a few warships off the coast of California. Suppose he threatened to boycott the U.S. on the grounds that the BLM is allowing the tortoise to go bad. Then suppose Putin were to get involved in that battle. What would we Americans think? What we Americans would think, I think, is none of his goddamn business. Let him stick to his own place. I mean, he's 10,000 miles away. Why is he mixing in with Bundy? Why is he mixing in with whatever internal U.S. issue there is? Well, I think that the same thing applies to the Crimea or Ukraine. What business of the U.S. What they do there? And as a matter of fact, Germany has invaded Russia 3 times in the last century, in the 20th century. And despicable as the USSR was in many ways, Stalin killed many, many people. A lot of Murray Rothbard talks about a priori history. Just because the USSR was bad internally, that means that they're bent on world aggression. I don't think so. I think that their foreign policy was to make a buffer zone so that the Germans couldn't invade them a 4th time. Not that I favor this or anything, but I think it's none of the U.S.'s business. The U.S.'s business is to defend the U.S., and the Crimea has got nothing to do with it. Now, with regard to warships, what do you call it, Somalia pirates attacking U.S. vessels on the high seas, assuming that the oceans aren't owned, and hopefully I'll get to that in my next book. Well, there I think it is defense because the oceans are, I don't know, public property, for want of a better word. So I think there would be some sort of justification there, but certainly not in the Crimea, certainly not in Egypt, certainly not in Iraq, certainly not in Afghanistan. I don't know what we were doing in Libya. I don't know why we have troops all throughout Europe, or why we have troops in Japan and Australia and South America, Africa. We've got troops in more countries than we don't have troops in. So I think that a compatible libertarian foreign policy would be one of not isolationism, not economic isolationism, but military isolationism. Just defend the area. Look, in 2008, I favored Obama versus McCain, and in 2012, I favored Obama versus Romney. Why did I do this? Well, certainly not because I think Obama's a great guy. He's practically a commie, and he's horrible domestically, and he's bad on just about everything. However, I sense in him less of a desire to nuke people. If we had had McCain as president, we would have been nuking people, and they'd be nuking us. And I'm against nuking. This kills a lot of innocent people, for one thing. And I think Romney was a little less rabid than McCain, but he was pretty rabid about China fiddling around with their currency or something. We've got to get the Chinese, got to go attack 1 billion Chinese. Thank God we have Obama, and I say that with thought, because we didn't go into Syria, whereas McCain and Romney, I think, I'm sure of McCain, I'm not sure of Romney, wanted to go into Syria. And what business is of the U.S. In Syria? And happily, if McCain was in charge now, we'd be bombing Russia over the Crimea. I think. I can't say for sure, but he's such a goddamn warmonger and therefore anti-libertarian. So I think that foreign policy is just as important, no, more important than economic liberty or personal liberties, because foreign policy kills masses of people, whereas economic policy, well, it's not good. I mean, I'm certainly in favor of free market, and Obama's not. But I think if I had to pick, and I realize I'm violating the, what is it, the diamond water paradox by picking any one, but if I had to pick one, namely I'm violating marginalism, but if I had to pick one, I would say foreign policy is more important than the other two. And libertarians have got to get with Ron Paul. Ron Paul is magnificent on foreign policy. Let's mind our own business. I think would be a nice summary of Ron Paul's foreign policy, and I think that's the libertarian position on that issue. Any
Hi,
more
Walter.
questions?
It's me again. I'm the one who asked your earlier question, but I have a completely different one. On defense matters, I've always thought that the libertarian analysis on matters of defense just is much more difficult to make now than it was when the country first formed. In other words, what is defense is not all that clear. If you look at when Israel preempted the war that Israel took a preemptive action, I mean, I would call that clearly defense, but it just shows how difficult it is to separate offense from defense. And I just think that the one issue that I have a problem with libertarians, the only issue really is I think they think that defense is so clear that you can really separate offense from defense in the way that we could when the country started.
No, I agree with you. There is a continuum. It's not a sharp red line in the sand or anything like that. There are cases that are, I don't know, how shall I say it, in the continuum or in the gray area between obvious defense and obvious offense. I've given cases of obvious offense with the U.S. budget more than the next 14 countries put together in terms of budget, being in so many different countries. That's clear. Now, the usual example against me would be Hitler. Isn't Hitler a bad guy? Yes, Hitler's a bad guy. And shouldn't we have preemptively fought Hitler? If they didn't declare war on us, we should declare war on them. And by the way, nobody declares war anymore. It's just up to the president, which is a little lunatic. Because one guy can determine whether we drop what do you call it, drones on people. But that's a separate issue. Now, my analysis, which is not original with me, I get this from the revisionist historians, that the reason we have a Hitler who was a dictator as opposed to a housemaker had nothing to do with World War II. It had to do with World War I. So what was going on in World War I? What was going on in World War I is that there were the Axis and the Allies, and neither of them were Hitlers, neither of them were particularly good or particularly bad, and they were fighting a draw. They were fighting a stalemate. They were killing 10,000 people over 3 inches of land. I'm exaggerating, but I think the war started in 14, and we got into it. The U.S. got into it in 1917. The reason we got into it is because we had more bonds with the English than with the Germans. If we had more bonds with that is, we, the ruling classes, Wall Street, had more bonds with the Germans than the British, we would have gotten in on the other side. But the point is, without us getting in there and tipping the balance, that war would have frittered out because they wouldn't have had any more soldiers. They were killing everybody. But what happened is the U.S. got in there to make the world safe for whatever it was, bonds of Wall Street, probably. And then came the Treaty of Versailles, which even Keynes, our friend on the left, even Keynes said that the Treaty of Versailles was a vicious thing that said Germany was responsible for everything evil, bad breath, underarm wars. Apart from that benefit, I think that the U.S. policy is a disaster.
Walter, this is going to have to be the last question for the evening.
Hi, Walter. It's me again, Steve Hankin. I have lots of questions for you, but here's my last question. what is your opinion on the gay marriage issue? Cato was the one who, essentially argued or filed an amicus, and they were involved. And I've thought that the libertarian position on gay marriage should be that the government should not be involved at all in writing marriage contracts. The government shouldn't have anything to do, whether it's a straight marriage or a gay marriage. And I thought that Cato, by entering into this, was sort of giving credence to the idea that the government should have a part in drafting marriage contracts. I thought they shouldn't have done it.
I I I agree with you 100%. Dave Bose was the vice president, I think, of Cato. Look, Cato has done great work. They've done very important and good work, but on this one, I think they're out to lunch. Uh, Dave Bose wrote a book, I forget the title, something about a primer on libertarianism or what is libertarianism. And in there, he pretty much said that if you're a homophobe, you can't be a libertarian, and you have to be a pro-homosexual and pro-gay marriage and pro this and all that. I think that's just thick libertarianism of the leftist sort, and I oppose it. I think you're absolutely right. The government should have nothing to do with that. Look, according to limited government libertarianism, the only function of government is to protect the persons and property of U.S. citizens in the U.S. Against enemies. And what's that got to do with marriage? What's that got to do with the FDA or I don't know, the EPA or anything else? Or it's certainly got nothing to do with marriage. Marriage should be something run by religious organizations or other voluntary organizations, and people should make their own marriage contracts. And if they want to have homosexuals or lesbians marry each other, that's fine. If they want to have group marriages like Heinlein was talking about, 3 women and 4 men, that's fine. If they want to have polygamy like Utah or the Mormons used to want. As long as you put on the libertarian eyeglasses and you ask, is it per se a violation of rights for 1 woman to marry 10 men? No. So then you can have polyandry, I think it's called. So I agree with you entirely.
All right, well, Walter, we thank you very much for Skyping into us tonight. Thank you for taking the time, and it was a wonderful talk. Thank you.
My pleasure. I really enjoyed it. Thanks for having me.
Thanks, sir.
I, I, I agree with you 100%. Dave Bose was the vice president, I think, of Cato. Look, Cato has done great work. They've done very important and good work, but on this one, I think they're out to lunch. Dave Bose wrote a book, I forget the title, something about a primer on libertarianism or what is libertarianism. And in there, he pretty much said that if you're a homophobe, you can't be a libertarian, and you have to be pro-homosexual and pro-gay marriage and pro this and all that. I think that's just thick libertarianism of the leftist sort, and I oppose it. I think you're absolutely right. The government should have nothing to do with that. Look, according to limited government libertarianism, the only function of government is to protect the persons and property of U.S. citizens in the U.S. Against enemies. And what's that got to do with marriage? What's that got to do with the FDA or I don't know, the EPA or anything else? Or it's certainly got nothing to do with marriage. Marriage should be something run by religious organizations or other voluntary organizations, and people should make their own marriage contracts. And if they want to have homosexuals or lesbians marry each other, that's fine. If they want to have group marriages like Heinlein was talking about, 3 women and 4 men, that's fine. They want to have polygamy like Utah or the Mormons used to want. That, as long as you put on the libertarian eyeglasses and you ask, is it per se a violation of rights for one woman to marry 10 men? No. So then you can have polyandry, I think it's called. So I agree with you entirely. My pleasure. I really enjoyed it. Thanks for having me.